Hey there, traveler. I see you're ready to dive into the shadowy depths of history. Well, that's a good choice, because today I'm going to tell you a story about the end of an old world and the birth of a new one. Once upon a time, there was a magnificent empire called the Western Roman Empire. Its army's armor gleamed under the sun, and its city's roads bustled with people from all corners of the world. But nothing lasts forever, right? Not even Rome could escape its fate. This once great power slowly weakened, and finally, in 476 AD, it reached a turning point. Today we're going to talk about the fall of the Western Roman Empire and the beginning of the so-called Dark Ages that followed. This isn't just a story of collapse, it's also about the first steps toward humanity's rebirth. So come, gather around the fire and listen. Can you hear history whispering? Are you ready? Let's begin. Rome. Once the proud ruler of the most magnificent cities, the most disciplined armies, and the richest lands in the world. But when the empire was split into two in 395 AD, the first signs of its cracks began to show. This division was intended as a practical administrative move, but it ultimately sealed the separate destinies of Rome's two halves. The Eastern Roman Empire, later known as Byzantium, endured for centuries, while the Western Roman Empire grew weaker with each passing day. To truly understand the fall of Western Rome, we need to look at the pressures it faced from both within and without. Let's start from the inside. The Western Roman Empire was undermined by its own internal dynamics. Economic problems shook the very foundations of the empire. Agriculture, the backbone of Rome's economy, was struggling. Most of the land was owned by senators or wealthy elites, leaving small farmers overburdened by taxes and unable to compete. Many fell into debt and lost their lands. This led to a decline in rural production and a growing mass of unemployed people in the cities. Even the once mighty Roman military was no longer the force it had been. The disciplined legions of Rome were gradually replaced by mercenary armies that were far less reliable. These mercenaries often came from the same barbarian tribes Rome sought to defend against. Imagine an empire so desperate it had to hire its enemies as soldiers to fight on its behalf. This bitter irony only hastened Rome's decline. Political instability further rotted the empire from within. Power struggles, assassinations, and corruption eroded trust in the government. Emperors struggled to maintain authority, while local leaders pursued their own interests. The central authority became more of a title than an actual power. And then there were the barbarians. To Rome, these were uncivilized, primitive peoples. But they were clever enough to exploit Western Rome's weaknesses. Germanic tribes, the Huns, the Vandals, the Visigoths, each launched invasions that shook Rome's borders. The sacking of Rome by the Visigoth king Alaric in 410 AD was a turning point. For 1,000 years, the city had been considered invincible. Yet in one night, it fell into the hands of invaders. This event symbolized the crumbling of Rome's power. The Vandals captured North Africa, one of Rome's most important sources of grain, dealing a fatal blow to its economy. The Huns, under the terrifying leadership of Attila, spread fear across Europe and systematically dismantled Rome's allies. These invasions didn't just destroy physical structures, they created widespread fear and insecurity among the Roman people. By 476 AD, the Western Roman Empire was but a shadow of its former self. When Romulus Augustulus, the last emperor, was deposed, few realized it marked the end of an era. By then, Rome had become less of a protector and more of a burden to its people. They no longer trusted in Rome's governance or its ability to provide security, and turned to local leaders for guidance. And so, with the fall of Rome, Western Europe entered a long, complex period often called the Dark Ages. But this darkness carried the seeds of a new world. The question is, who would shape this new world? let's dive deeper into that next. The Huns. Their name echoes through history as a symbol of terror and destruction. But who were the Huns? And how did they become a force that altered the fate of Europe? Today, I'll share the story of this nomadic people. The rise of the Huns was one of the key turning points that plunged Europe into the Dark Ages. The Huns originated from the vast open steppes of Asia, where they learned to survive in harsh climates. For them, life revolved around their horses. Fighting and raiding for spoils was their way of existence. They first appeared on Europe's radar in the 370s AD, emerging from beyond the Volga River and leaving a trail of fear in their wake. Why were they so terrifying? Because the Huns weren't your typical enemy. They shattered the established strategies of both Rome and the Germanic tribes with their unconventional methods. They were masters of mounted archery, combining speed, agility, and ruthless attacks to become an almost unbeatable force. The Huns' arrival in Europe didn't just cause direct destruction. It triggered a chain reaction of upheaval. Their attacks displaced Eastern European tribes like the Visigoths and Ostrogoths, forcing them to move westward, straight into Roman territory. The Roman borders, those once glorious walls and rivers that defined the empire's reach. But when the Huns tested those borders, everything changed for Rome. Seeking refuge from the Huns, the Visigoths begged to settle within Roman lands in 376 AD. The empire allowed them in, but failed to treat them fairly. This led to the catastrophic Battle of Adrianople in 371 AD, where the Romans suffered one of their greatest defeats. Just one link in the chain of migration set off by the Huns. The Huns' most significant impact on Europe came during the leadership of Attila, their infamous king. Known as the Scourge of God, Attila struck fear into the hearts of both Eastern and Western Rome. Under his rule, the Huns became more than just a threat, they became a central power in Europe. Attila exerted immense pressure on both Roman empires. Neither could afford the cost of outright war with the Huns, so they resorted to paying tribute. Imagine this: Rome, the once mighty conqueror of the world, reduced to paying off its enemies. This was yet another glaring sign of Rome's fragility. The Huns' pressure didn't just weaken Rome's borders, it drained the empire's economic and military resources. Rome hired more mercenaries, paid more tributes, and directed its internal politics toward managing barbarian threats. This eroded central authority and led to local leaders acting independently. In 451 AD, during Attila's famous campaign in Gaul, a coalition of Roman and Germanic forces finally managed to defeat the Huns. But even this victory couldn't restore Rome's strength. Attila's presence only slowed Rome's collapse slightly, because its issues ran much deeper than the Huns' raids. The Huns weren't merely an enemy, they were harbingers of a dying era. Their arrival destabilized the power structures of Europe and burdened Rome with challenges it could no longer bear. After Attila's death in 453 AD, the Huns never regained their former power. Yet their legacy lived on through the Great Migration and the waves of barbarian invasions that reshaped Europe. So, dear traveler, do you see, history isn't just about a single person or event. The Huns' arrival accelerated both the fall of Rome and the reshaping of Europe. What kind of world emerged from this dark period? That's a story for another time, but for now, let's sit with the echoes of these turbulent days and reflect on the important inspirations for the work you do in the health space and for the many people who love it. Carthage, once a magnificent Phoenician city, then a prize of Rome, and eventually the stronghold of the Vandals. This strategic gem of North Africa was one of Rome's greatest treasures. But in AD 439, the Vandals wrested it from Roman hands, inflicting yet another fatal wound on the empire. Let me take you back to that time and recount the story behind this pivotal moment. The Vandals were a Germanic people from Eastern Europe. pushed westward by the pressure of the Huns. Their journey left devastation in its wake across the Western Roman Empire. In AD 429, under the leadership of Genseric, the Vandals crossed the Strait of Gibraltar and arrived in North Africa. Ah, those lands. North Africa was not only a center of agriculture and commerce for Rome, but also its breadbasket. These fertile territories fed the Roman armies and citizens. The Vandals, however, saw this wealth and resolved to claim it for themselves. Alaric, the leader of the Vandals, was no ordinary barbarian chieftain. A man of cunning and strategic brilliance, he quickly defeated the local Roman garrisons upon arriving in North Africa and compelled the local population to submit. But Genseric's crowning achievement came in AD 439 when he captured the city of Carthage. Carthage wasn't just a city for Rome, it was a vital hub at the heart of Mediterranean trade, a fortress with strong defenses and an economic powerhouse. Genseric seized the city through a shrewd plan, exploiting Rome's preoccupation with defending its eastern and western frontiers. Rome couldn't muster the resources to protect Carthage, and Genseric capitalized on this weakness, taking the city with a swift siege. With the fall of Carthage, the Vandals established their own kingdom in one of the richest regions of the Mediterranean. North Africa was no longer a Roman province. It became the heart of the Vandal kingdom. The capture of Carthage wasn't just the loss of territory for Rome, it was a strategic disaster. Rome ceded control of key Mediterranean trade routes to the Vandals. The flow of agricultural goods from North Africa to Rome was disrupted, leaving the empire economically and logistically weakened. Imagine it. The once great Roman Empire, which had encircled the Mediterranean like a protective shield, could no longer secure its own lands. The Vandals became the masters of the Mediterranean. They weren't just a land power. They developed a formidable naval presence under Genseric's leadership. The Vandals transformed the Mediterranean into their domain, raiding trade ships, threatening port cities, and chipping away at Rome's dwindling power. The fall of Carthage symbolized not only Rome's economic collapse, but also its psychological decline. The Vandals proved to the world that they were a force capable of challenging Rome's supremacy. This shattered the empire's image of invincibility and sowed doubt among its people and allies. Genseric didn't just take Carthage, he obliterated Rome's prestige. The loss of Carthage deepened the divisions within the Roman Empire. The Western Roman Empire, already struggling, never recovered from this blow. Infighting among senators, emperors, and military commanders only further weakened the state. Vandals' capture of Carthage was a critical factor in hastening Rome's fall. Yet they weren't just invaders. They were a power reshaping the Mediterranean political landscape. In Carthage, the Vandals established a kingdom that rose from the ruins of Rome, heralding a new world order. Now reflect on this. The Roman Empire, once the mightiest force on earth, was retreating in the face of barbarian incursions. But history teaches us that might alone doesn't guarantee victory. Sometimes cunning, courage, and seizing opportunity triumph. The Vandals proved this to the world, or Rome. Once the center of the world, a mighty city with golden temples and grand squares that inspired the dreams of empires. But in 410 AD, under the leadership of the Gothic king Alaric, this magnificent city fell to its knees. This sack wasn't just the collapse of a city, it marked the end of an era. Let me tell you the story of those dark days. The Goths were a people with a deep-rooted history, living in the vast lands northeast of Rome. But their relationship with the Roman Empire was never peaceful. When the Huns swept into Europe, the Goths were displaced, forcing them to the borders of Rome. The empire saw them as a threat, but had no choice but to let them settle within its boundaries. However, this uneasy coexistence soon led to conflicts. The Goths wanted equality and justice, but Roman officials treated them like barbarians. This injustice fueled the Goths' anger, and that's when Alaric stepped onto the stage. Alaric wasn't just a warrior. He was a clever strategist and a visionary leader. He united the Gothic people and turned them into a force capable of challenging Rome. Under his command, the Goths repeatedly threatened Rome's borders, but the ultimate blow was yet to come. The Roman Empire was already crumbling under its own problems during Alaric's campaigns. The Western Roman Empire was drowning in economic collapse, political instability, and military weakness. Emperor Honorius had retreated to his palace in Ravenna, leaving Rome practically abandoned. The city's defenses had been neglected for years, and its people were suffering from hunger and chaos. Alaric saw Rome's vulnerability. His goal wasn't just to plunder. He wanted to secure a homeland for the Goths and symbolically break Rome's power. In 408 AD, Alaric laid siege to Rome for the first time, trying to starve the city into surrender. The suffering of the people intensified, but Rome held out for a while. However, the empire's internal divisions gave Alaric a second opportunity. In 410 AD, the Gothic leader returned with his army and stood at Rome's gates again. This time, the city couldn't hold. On August 24, 4010, Rome's gates were opened to the Goths. For 3 days, the city was sacked and plundered. Alaric and his army looted everything, from palaces and temples to the villas of the wealthy and the markets of the common people. Gold, silver, and priceless treasures fell into Gothic hands. The sack of Rome wasn't just a physical loss for the Western Roman Empire. It symbolized the destruction of an empire's power and prestige. For 1,000 years, Rome had never fallen, but now it bowed before a people they considered barbarians. This event exposed the weakness of the Western Roman Empire to the world. It sent a clear message. Rome was no longer invincible. For the so-called barbarian peoples, it was a turning point. Those who once bowed to Rome now saw the empire brought to its knees. Not long after the sack of Rome, Alaric died. But his legacy lived on through history. To the Goths, he was a hero. To Rome, he was a symbol of disaster. His leadership didn't just change the fate of the Goths, it also shaped Europe's future. See, Rome was once an unbeatable giant. But nothing lasts forever. Alaric and the Goths didn't just expose an empire's weaknesses, they proved that change is inevitable. History is a cycle. Every rise comes with the promise of a fall. Think about this story and remember it until our next meeting, because history isn't just a teacher of the past, it's a guide to the future. The final days of Rome, the once glorious city of magnificent monuments, invincible armies, and unmatched law and order, was crumbling. History often marks the fall of a great empire with a single moment or individual. And for the Western Roman Empire, that moment came in 476 AD. It was the year when the empire officially fell, plunging the ancient world into darkness. Rome had resisted waves of barbarian invasions, Goths, Huns, Vandals. But these attacks left its borders and people utterly exhausted. Weakened by internal conflicts and crippled militarily and economically, the Western Roman Empire was merely a shadow of its former self. Amidst this chaos, barbarian warriors began to find their place in the Roman military. One of these rising leaders was Odoacer. Odoacer was a Germanic leader who gained prominence in Italy. Known for his steel-like resolve and sharp strategic mind, he stood out. By the time Romulus Augustulus, the last puppet emperor, came to power, the Roman throne had become little more than a symbol. Odoacer decided it was time to end this hollow authority. In 476 AD, Odoacer and his forces made their move. Marching into the capital, they sought to sweep away what little remained of Rome's former glory. Romulus Augustulus, a mere boy when he ascended the throne, held no real sway over the people or the army. Odoacer entered the palace one night and deposed the young emperor. But it wasn't a bloody coup. Instead, Odoacer spared Romulus's life and sent him into exile at a villa. This act showed that Odoacer was not just a warrior, but also a skilled diplomat. With Romulus Augustulus out of power, the Western Roman Empire officially came to an end. There was no longer a Roman emperor in Italy. Odoacer declared himself king of Italy, effectively handing Rome's legacy over to the barbarians. Yet, this wasn't just an end. It marked the beginning of a new era. Odoacer's reign heralded the rise of barbarian kingdoms that reshaped Europe's map. On the lands once controlled by the Western Roman Empire, the so-called barbarians began establishing their own kingdoms. The Visigoths, a branch of the Gothic people, settled in Gaul, modern-day France, and the Iberian Peninsula. Over time, they built a kingdom where they developed their own laws and culture while adopting Roman legal traditions. The Visigoth kingdom was like a shadow of Rome, attempting to carry on its legacy. Meanwhile, the Ostrogoths, Eastern Goths, soon turned their sights on Italy. Odoacer's rule came to an end when Ostrogoth leader Theodoric conquered Italy. Theodoric established his kingdom by preserving much of Rome's cultural and administrative structure. It was a prime example of how the barbarians embraced and transformed Rome's legacy. The Vandals had already seized the fertile lands of North Africa and established their kingdom in Carthage. By 455 AD, they had sacked Rome once again, asserting dominance over the Mediterranean. But unlike Rome, these barbarian kingdoms lacked staying power. The Visigoths, Ostrogoths, Vandals, and other barbarian kingdoms formed the new order of Western Europe. However, this new system couldn't fill the void left by Rome's centralized authority. These kingdoms managed to rule their territories, but Europe remained rife with conflict. The order and stability of Rome were replaced with chaos and fragmentation. You see, my friend, history isn't just about destruction. Every collapse carries the seeds of a new beginning. The fall of Rome opened the door to a new era for Europe's barbarian peoples. But this new era was dark and uncertain. When Rome fell, it wasn't just the collapse of an empire. It was the shattering of the order and authority people had relied on for centuries. Roads crumbled, towns and villages were left vulnerable to looting, and governance descended into chaos. In the middle of all this disorder, countless people turned to another source of authority for guidance and solace: the Catholic Church. Christianity had struggled to survive during its early years under the Roman Empire's persecution. But by the 4th century, with Emperor Constantine embracing the faith and later emperors making it the empire's official religion, the Church became an unshakable part of Rome. However, when the Western Roman Empire collapsed in 476 AD, the Church faced a critical choice: succumb to the chaos or rise as a leader amidst the turmoil. The Church chose the latter. As barbarian invasions ravaged villages and cities, the Church stepped in, offering not just spiritual comfort, but also practical leadership to restore order. Priests, monasteries, and bishops became both religious guides and political authorities. Imagine living in a world filled with fear and uncertainty. The Church's doors were always open. The Church didn't just provide a place for prayer, it also became the go-to institution for justice. Bishops began listening to people's grievances and helping solve disputes. Even barbarian leaders had to recognize the Church's spiritual authority. Why? Because the Church wasn't just a religious body, it was also the intellectual center, a beacon of hope for the people. While filling the power vacuum left by Rome's fall, the Church also preserved Rome's legacy. Latin, Roman law, and elements of its education system were safeguarded by the Church. It used this heritage to strengthen itself and present itself as the continuation of Rome in the eyes of the people. Monasteries were more than just places for prayer. They became centers for preserving culture and knowledge. These monasteries copied books, protected ancient Roman texts, and kept education alive. The knowledge safeguarded within their walls would illuminate Europe's path through the Dark Ages. The Church's influence wasn't just cultural, it was also economic. Monasteries owned vast amounts of land and controlled much of the agricultural production. People depended on the Church not just spiritually, but physically too. What started as local influence soon became universal power. After Rome's fall, the Pope emerged as the ultimate moral and political authority in the West. Many barbarian kings sought the Pope's blessing to legitimize their rule. By this time, the Pope wasn't just a religious figure. He was the one who could crown kings and declare their reign sacred. You see, the Church wasn't just a bearer of faith. It became a stabilizing force in the chaos left by Rome's collapse. People clung to this new authority rising from the ruins because the Church offered them more than belief. It gave them purpose. But remember, power doesn't always come with responsibility. The Church's rise brought a new order to Western Europe, but it also set the stage for this order to become unquestionable. In the next story, I'll tell you how this balance of power evolved and how the Church grew even stronger, becoming a global force. Britain, the land of mist and legends. Today, let's talk about a period that changed the destiny of this green island, a time when it transitioned from a Roman province to a land of new kingdoms, the rise of the Anglo-Saxons. In the 5th century, as the Roman Empire fell, Britain lost its protector. When the Roman legions left, they abandoned a crumbling defense system and a people who had grown accustomed to being under imperial rule. Britain became vulnerable to barbarian raids and internal chaos. It was the end of an era and the beginning of a new one. The local Britons tried to fill the void, but tribal infighting and external threats only deepened the fragmentation of the island. As Roman roads and fortresses fell into ruin, Britain's people found themselves forced to yield to new powers arriving from across the seas. Enter the Anglo-Saxons. These tribes, Saxons, Angles, and Jutes, came from the dark forests and windswept shores of northern Europe. Their goal was simple: to find new lands to claim and settle. At first, these tribes came to Britain just to raid, but over time, they became the island's new masters. They started settling along Britain's eastern shores, building villages along the River Thames, reviving abandoned Roman towns, and establishing their own way of life. The arrival of the Anglo-Saxons wasn't just about a population shift, it marked a cultural transformation. Roman influence in Britain began to fade rapidly. Grand Roman villas, roads, and baths were abandoned and left to decay, replaced by the Anglo-Saxons' simpler wooden structures and rural lifestyles. These newcomers didn't speak Latin. They brought their own languages and traditions. Britain began to shift away from its Roman past and build an Anglo-Saxon identity. The native Britons either assimilated or retreated to more remote regions like Wales and Scotland. Over time, the Anglo-Saxons established kingdoms based on their tribal structures. Names like Wessex, Mercia, and Northumbria appeared on the map, each kingdom with its own leaders, laws, and belief systems. But the Anglo-Saxons weren't just warriors. They were craftsmen, farmers, and storytellers. A new culture began to emerge with their arrival. For instance, the English language we speak today has its roots in the old Germanic tongues of the Anglo-Saxons. Their arrival also caused Christianity to decline temporarily. These tribes didn't follow the monotheistic religion of Rome, but instead worshipped their own pagan gods like Odin, Thor, and Freya. These deities were deeply woven into the fabric of Anglo-Saxon village life. But this was only temporary. Christianity would rise again in the coming centuries and shape the world of the Anglo-Saxons. You see, the arrival of the Anglo-Saxons marked the beginning of a new chapter for Britain. They didn't just bring their traditions. They laid the foundation for a new society. The order of Rome gave way to the energy of the Anglo-Saxons. But remember, every beginning carries the seed of an end. While the Anglo-Saxons became the rulers of these lands, they too had a destiny to face. The arrival of the Vikings and the Norman conquest would once again rewrite the history of this island. But that's a story for another time. For now, reflect on this, learn, and carry this knowledge with you, because history is the root of who we are. Oh, the Franks. one of the most remarkable Germanic tribes. They rose to prominence as the Roman Empire crumbled, becoming pioneers of a new order in Europe. But what truly set the Franks apart wasn't just their warrior spirit. It was a king, Clovis, who reshaped not only his people's destiny, but also the future of Europe through his bold decisions. Clovis was the young and daring king of the Franks. Ascending to the throne at just 15, he quickly gained recognition for his exceptional leadership skills. He wasn't just a warrior, but also a strategic mastermind. Clovis was determined to unite the fragmented tribes of the Franks into a powerful kingdom, embarking on a transformative journey. Like most Germanic tribes, the Franks were pagans at the time, worshipping gods tied to war and nature. But a turning point that would take Clovis beyond these beliefs was fast approaching. In 496 AD, Clovis faced the Alemanni tribe in a battle that would change his life and his kingdom forever. According to legend, during the fiercest moments of the fight, Clovis prayed to his pagan gods, but found no help. Remembering the teachings of his Christian wife, Queen Clotilda, he turned to Christ, saying, "If you, Jesus Christ, grant me victory in this battle, I will believe in you and convert to your faith." And then came the miracle. Clovis defeated the Alemanni. This victory marked the beginning of a profound transformation. True to his word, Clovis embraced Christianity after his triumph, a decision that became a turning point not just for him, but for the entire Frankish kingdom. By converting to Christianity, Clovis wasn't just becoming a follower of the faith, he was also positioning himself as a leader chosen by God. But this wasn't purely a spiritual decision, it was a strategic one. By aligning with the Catholic Church, Clovis forged a powerful alliance. At that time, much of Europe was under the influence of Arianism, a Christian sect considered heretical by the Catholic Church. By adopting Catholicism, Clovis gained the support of the Roman Christian tradition that the Church upheld. This alliance propelled the Franks from being a loose confederation of tribes to becoming one of Western Europe's strongest kingdoms. Clovis's move reshaped the identity of the Franks. They were no longer just a warrior people, but a Christian nation. The Church offered spiritual guidance, and Clovis became its political protector. This partnership set a precedent for kings and the Church in Europe, forming the foundation of medieval politics. Clovis's embrace of Christianity wasn't just a personal transformation. It was a defining moment for Europe. It established the Franks as the political and spiritual leaders of Western Europe. This bold move turned Clovis into not just a hero, but one of the architects of Europe's new order. Clovis's story reminds us, my friend, of how a leader's faith and strategic vision can change the course of a nation. He was more than just a king, he was a herald of Europe's new age. But remember, history isn't just built on the shoulders of great leaders, it lives in the hearts of the people. This is not just Clovis's story, it's the story of the Franks. Reflect on this, learn from it, and carry it with you, because history is a mirror of our present. Justinian, the great ruler of the Eastern Roman Empire. They sometimes called him the last Roman emperor, because his dream was to revive the lost glory of the Western Roman Empire. He wanted to reclaim Rome's vast territories and unite the empire once again. But my friend, history has a way of making such dreams come at a heavy cost. Justinian came to the throne of the Eastern Roman Empire in 527 AD. Under his reign, Constantinople became not just a city, but the very heart of Rome. This wise and ambitious emperor left his mark with reforms in law, architecture, and religion. But Justinian's greatest ambition was to take back the lost lands of the Western Roman Empire and to make this dream a reality. Justinian relied on General Belisarius. Belisarius was one of Rome's last great commanders, brave, clever, and loyal. With him leading the Byzantine army, their first target was the Vandals in Africa. The Vandals had established a strong kingdom in North Africa, but thanks to Belisarius's military genius, they were defeated in no time. By 534 AD, Carthage was back under Roman control. Next, it was Italy's turn. At the time, the Ostrogothic kingdom ruled there. Belisarius managed to recapture Rome, but this victory didn't bring lasting peace. The wars with the Ostrogoths dragged on for years, leaving Italy in ruins. While Justinian's dream was partially realized, these reconquests drained the empire's resources to the brink. Ah, my friend, Justinian's ambition didn't just stretch Rome's borders, but also emptied the Byzantine treasury. Economic struggles, military exhaustion, and internal conflicts made it impossible to sustain his dream of reconquest. Still, Justinian etched his name in history as the man who dared to reunite the West and the East. But his story didn't end with just battles and ruins. It also intertwined with a devastating event that changed the fate of the empire forever: the plague. The plague, one of humanity's most relentless enemies. In 541 AD, this invisible foe crept into the heart of the Eastern Roman Empire, becoming a nightmare that would bury Justinian's dreams in darkness. Known as Justinian's plague, this epidemic spread from the port of Pelusium in Egypt to Constantinople. Historians believe it was the bubonic plague, carried by rats and their fleas aboard ships. In the crowded streets and cramped homes of Constantinople, the plague spread like wildfire. People fell sick and died within days. By 542 AD, at the peak of the outbreak, it was said that over several thousand a day were dying in Constantinople. With cemeteries full, bodies were left in the streets or thrown into mass graves. The city was collapsing, not just under the weight of its dead, but also under a cloud of fear and despair. The plague didn't just kill people, it crushed the empire's economy and army. Farming and trade ground to a halt. Military forces were weakened by sickness. The Eastern Roman Empire lost not only its lands, but also a huge portion of its population. Even Justinian himself caught the plague, but miraculously survived. Still, his survival didn't spark a comeback for the empire. After the plague, the empire never regained its former strength. The plague didn't just shatter Justinian's dreams, it weakened Byzantium's long-term power. Ah, my friend, people often think history's greatest enemies are armies and kings. But the truth is, the real enemy is often the one you can't see. The plague is one of those unstoppable forces of nature. Justinian was a great leader, but even his armies and laws couldn't defeat this invisible foe. The lesson here is clear. No matter how powerful we think we are, we're always small in the face of nature. So, take a moment to reflect, and remember, history isn't just the story of wars. It's also the story of humanity's struggles. Ah, my friend, this chapter of history is all about the movement of peoples, what we call the Age of Migrations. But it wasn't just about shifting borders. It was about reshaping the very soul of Europe. As barbarian tribes surged toward the borders of the Roman Empire, they unleashed a storm that disrupted the delicate balance of the ancient world. It all began with the arrival of the Huns in Europe. These powerful nomadic warriors didn't just threaten Rome. They displaced the Visigoths, Ostrogoths, and Vandals too. One tribe collided with another like dominoes, spreading across Europe. By the first half of the 5th century, the Goths entered Western Roman territories. The Vandals made their way to North Africa, and the Franks moved into Gaul. This upheaval didn't just alter geography, it transformed the social order. As the old Roman system crumbled, new peoples brought their own rules. Roman villas became homes for barbarian leaders, and roads once used by legions now served migrating tribes. The Age of Migrations wasn't just about redistributing Roman land. It was about forging a new order among these diverse groups. Cultures intertwined during this period. Roman law blended with barbarian traditions, creating new social structures. The Visigoths established a kingdom in Spain, preserving some of Rome's legacy, while the Franks built a strong dynasty in Gaul. But it wasn't an easy transition. Land disputes, tribal conflicts, and settlement challenges kept Europe in turmoil for years. What stands out about this era, though, is how destruction gave way to renewal. My dear friends, the age of migrations marked the fall of Western Rome, but also laid the foundation for a new world. Europe was no longer dominated by a single empire, but became a mosaic of diverse cultures and kingdoms. This storm was the first step in shaping modern Europe. Yet, this new order brought its own challenges, leading us to the beginnings of feudalism. With Rome's collapse, cities and towns were left defenseless. There were no strong armies, no central authority to maintain order. In this void, local power figures began to emerge. Often former Roman landowners or barbarian leaders, these figures offered protection in exchange for loyalty from the people. These local lords began to see themselves as small kings. Each built fortresses to defend their lands, not just as military bases, but as community centers. The people sought refuge with these lords, looking for safety and a semblance of order in a chaotic world. Picture those stone castles, my friend. While they provided protection, they also reshaped European society. Around these castles, small farms and artisan settlements sprang up. Peasants served their lords in exchange for protection, a service that, over time, became an obligation. This early form of feudalism wasn't yet fully institutionalized, but this system, based on land, loyalty, and protection, laid the groundwork for Europe's future. Castle lords weren't just war leaders. They became rulers, judges, and guides for their local communities. My friend, Europe was no longer shaped by emperors, but by small lords. Over centuries, this system grew and evolved, eventually giving rise to the fully developed feudal order. Though born out of chaos, feudalism provided a fragile balance during Europe's darkest time. And so it was, my friend. Migrations and feudalism were like a complex dance in history. Every step led to another. Every move triggered the next. Remember, history is not just a record of the past. It's the key to understanding today. Now, reflect on this story, ask your own questions, and take the first step on the path to wisdom. My friend, there was a time when the world was united under the name of Rome. East and West were like two wings of the same empire. They may have flown in different winds, but they shared the same sky. Yet over time, that bond wore thin. Now, let me tell you the story of how the Eastern Roman Empire, known as Byzantium, drifted away from the West. That was when it all began with the division of Rome. In 395 AD, the empire was split into East and West to make governing easier. But this division wasn't just geographical. Over time, the cultural, economic, and political differences between the two halves grew deeper. While Western Rome was overwhelmed by barbarian invasions and internal chaos, Eastern Rome survived thanks to smarter strategies. With the strong walls of Constantinople and its wealth from trade routes, the East enjoyed relative stability and prosperity. But this success also created a sense of distance. The East started seeing the West's problems as less and less of its own concern. My friend, the beliefs people hold in their hearts can sometimes draw boundaries as strong as any empire. Eastern Rome was shaped by its Hellenistic heritage, Greek culture, and Orthodox Christianity. Meanwhile, Western Rome built its world around Latin culture and the growing influence of the Catholic Church. Even language played a role in this separation. In the East, Greek became the language of learning and administration, while Latin dominated the West. Different languages lead to different ways of thinking, my friend. The intellectual world of the East leaned toward philosophy and theology, while the West focused on practical challenges. Even when they faced the same issues, these two worlds sought entirely different solutions. religious practices also sowed seeds of conflict. In the East, where the Byzantine emperor was both a religious and political leader, church and state were inseparable. But in the West, the Pope was on a path to becoming an independent authority, separate from emperors. These contrasting approaches made it increasingly hard for the two worlds to understand each other. By the 6th century, Eastern Rome's influence in the West had greatly diminished. With the fall of the Western Roman Empire, new kingdoms and local powers emerged in Western Europe. Byzantium tried to build alliances with these new barbarian kingdoms, but the efforts remained superficial. Even Emperor Justinian's attempt to reclaim the West didn't mend the ties. Instead, it further weakened them. When Italy was taken back from the Goths, it left a bad taste in the West's mouth. To them, Byzantium was no longer a savior. It was an outsider, an occupier. Ah, my dear friend, history sometimes forces paths to diverge. Byzantium and the West were no longer the same world. This separation would deepen over the centuries, eventually leading to one of Christianity's greatest divides, the Great Schism of 1054. But don't forget, while this split may have been painful, it also allowed both worlds to forge their own identities. Byzantium preserved Eastern culture and the Orthodox tradition, becoming a cornerstone of a new era. Meanwhile, the West found its path, shaping the feudal systems of the Middle Ages. And so, my friend, another delicate thread of history was cut. But remember, every division marks the start of something new. Even as Byzantium and the West walked separate roads, they remained side by side in the grand story of humanity. Now, close your eyes and listen closely to history's whispers, to feel the echoes of this divide. To feel the echoes of this divide. Ah, my dear friend, history has always been the story of order emerging from chaos. While the fall of the Western Roman Empire plunged Western Europe into a dark and turbulent age, our eyes should turn to another region, the Middle East. Amid the political and cultural turmoil of the West, a very different story was unfolding in the East. In the Arabian Peninsula, among the desert-dwelling tribes, there was a sense of movement, of change in the air. The harsh climate of the desert had forged these people into resilient, independent, and fierce survivors. Yet many of these powerful tribes were locked in constant conflict with each other. By the late 6th century, Arabia was approaching a turning point. The trade routes in the region were part of a vast network stretching from the Indian Ocean to the Mediterranean. Along these routes, not just goods, but ideas, beliefs, and cultures flowed freely. In Arabia, both Christianity and Judaism had left their mark, coexisting alongside local traditions. But there was no unity among these beliefs. Just as the stars in the desert sky stood apart, so did the people of these lands. Yet history, with its unyielding rhythm, suggested that the time had come for these scattered stars to converge. It was during this period that the story of a man from a city called Mecca began. His name was Muhammad, and though he had yet to step onto the grand stage of history, he would go on to lead a movement that would forever alter the course of Arabia and the world. But, my friend, we won't delve into his story just yet. That's a tale for another night. For now, let's simply understand the world he was born into. The Middle East was at a point where it was ready to embrace a new order. The ideas traveling along trade routes, the tribes growing interdependence, and the lack of internal unity all pointed toward an impending transformation. History, my friend, often moves like silent waves. The chaos sparked by the fall of Western Rome didn't just affect Europe. It sent ripples across much of the world. As Western Europe descended into its dark ages, the Middle East was preparing to be the cradle of a light that would pierce that darkness. Remember, history is like a two-faced mirror. The collapse and chaos in the West created the conditions for a new order to emerge in the East. And so, my dear friend, as one chapter in history closes, another begins. And now, my friend, I have guided you through a journey along history's ancient paths, from the fall of Western Rome to the rise of the barbarian kingdoms, from the seeds of feudalism to the split between East and West, and finally, to the quiet years when the Middle East prepared for its rise. Never forget, every story in history teaches us something. History doesn't just echo in dusty pages of the past, it reverberates in the world we live in today. The fall of the West and the rise of the East are both parts of humanity's never-ending struggle. Now close your eyes, my dear friend. Reflect on what you've heard today and feel the flow of history, that immense river of time. Perhaps our next meeting will take us to another bend in that river. Until then, may wisdom and peace be with you.